She didn't cry when she was betrayed. She didn't run when every step she took was being watched. And on the snowiest night Colorado had seen in years, she lit the match of truth. Behind the walls of their quiet home was a hidden bunker filled with secrets, weapons, and files on other women. She placed a candle on the window ledge and walked away without looking back. And him, the man who once controlled her every breath, was now exposed alone, ashamed, and with nowhere left to hide. This isn't just a story of revenge, it's a journey out of a hell disguised as love. Tap subscribe now so you never miss the heart-wrenching, truth-filled, and courage-driven films we bring to you every week. Under the low hum of the refrigerator, Lyra Jennings stood barefoot on the cold tile of her small Colorado kitchen, slowly wiping the stovetop for the third time. Her movements were methodical, almost too gentle, as though afraid to make a sound. Outside, the wind howled against the snow-glazed windows, muffling the world beyond. Inside, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was trained, it was tactical. At 34, Lyra looked like the kind of woman most people wouldn't remember from the grocery store. Hair tied back in a loose knot, oversized sweatshirt, no makeup, no jewelry, no mess. She'd learned that clean edges gave fewer excuses for confrontation. The clock above the sink ticked. It was 7:41 p.m. She heard it before she saw him, the subtle rattle of keys at the front door, followed by two deliberate clicks as Nathan locked the deadbolt behind him. The sound hit her spine like a reflex. She straightened, wiped her hands on a dish rag, and waited. She didn't greet him. He didn't expect it. Nathan Jennings, her husband of 3 years, stepped into the kitchen with the presence of a man who thought the house owed him quiet. His boots thudded against the hardwood as he removed his jacket without a glance in her direction. The temperature in the room dropped with him. He looked the same as always, neatly pressed military-style sweater jeans without a wrinkled beard trimmed to regulation length, even though he hadn't served in nearly 4 years. His eyes scanned the room like a soldier entering enemy terrain. Then they landed on her. "Who called you today?" he asked, voice clipped, emotionless. Lyra blinked once slowly. Her hand reached for the kettle. She didn't answer right away. She never did. Delay bought time. But Nathan didn't like time. He liked facts. He stepped forward too close. "Lyra." Still not looking at him, she replied, "Just Ellie, about the choir fundraiser." He tilted his head slightly, the way a lion might, before deciding whether to pounce or wait. She texted, "Didn't call." His voice was low, controlled. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "Right, sorry, just a text." He watched her for a moment too long, then turned toward the living room without a word. She exhaled silently as his footsteps retreated, the floor creaking under his weight. In another house, another marriage, that silence might have felt like forgiveness. Here it was the eye of the storm. From the hallway, she heard him settle into his recliner, the one he'd ordered online with combat-tested frame support. She heard the flick of his lighter before she saw the sharp, brief glow from the living room. Cigarette smoke curled under the archway. Lyra poured hot water into a chipped mug and took her tea to the window. Her reflection stared back, pale, skin-weary eyes, shoulders slouched slightly inward like she was trying to disappear into her own ribs. She looked nothing like the vibrant music teacher her students adored. But that woman only existed from 8:00 a.m. to 3:15 p.m. At 3:16, she became this, a shadow with a mug memorizing her own silence. Nathan called out from the living room. "You delete the call logs yet?" She swallowed hard. "Yes." "You sure?" I double-checked. There was a pause, then "Bring me the phone." Her heart stuttered. She took a breath, turned, and walked to the kitchen counter where her phone sat face down like it too knew when to behave. She brought it to him, placed it gently on the armrest beside him, and stepped back. Nathan didn't thank her. He never did. He picked up the phone, scrolled for 30 seconds, and tossed it back onto the cushion beside him. "You should keep the brightness lower. It drains the battery." She nodded. The television murmured in the background something meaningless, a documentary about Arctic wolves. Nathan lit another cigarette. He wasn't watching the show. He never did. The TV was just a sound barrier, a cover. Lyra moved quietly back to the kitchen, rinsed her cup even though it wasn't empty, and set it upside down in the drying rack. Then, without looking up, she walked to the hallway closet, reached inside, and pulled down a dusty shoebox labeled Christmas candles. Inside, under a thin layer of old tinsel, was her other phone, the hidden one. She brought it to her bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. Every movement was muscle memory now. She slipped the back off the device, swapped out the microSD card with a fresh one, and powered it up. The home screen glowed faintly. She opened the File Vault app, tapped import, and watched the progress bar fill as the device downloaded surveillance footage from the last 24 hours. 12 hours of camera feed. She didn't need all of it. Just one segment from 3:27 p.m. when Nathan had returned home early and gone directly to the bathroom. She knew the hallway cam would catch the reflection in the mirror. Nathan leaning close, tapping at his own temple, whispering to himself. She didn't know what he was saying yet, but the habit had become more frequent. She needed the footage for the folder, the one she labeled Fallout Sonata. When it finished uploading, she pulled a thumb drive from her sock drawer and copied the segment. Then she powered the phone down, slid it back into its spot under the loose floorboard beside her bed, and returned to the kitchen. Nathan hadn't moved. She picked up the remote, pretending to glance at the screen, then reached up, stretched slightly, and adjusted the ceiling fan. It was subtle, just enough to make it seem like the pull chain had jammed again. Then, in a single smooth movement, she pressed her hand to the rim of the glass dome fixture and twisted slightly. It popped loose in her palm. Inside, nestled behind the frosted glass, was a small black camera no bigger than a cherry. She pulled it out, checked the side port, and quickly ejected the micro SD card. Her breath didn't catch. Her hands didn't tremble. She'd done this before. She slipped the card into her pocket, replaced the dome, tugged the pull chain once for good measure, and stepped down from the chair. Nathan hadn't noticed. She walked back to the stove and resumed wiping the same spot she'd already cleaned 3 times. And in her mind, she repeated a phrase she'd written on the first page of her hidden notebook. Control is a god built from silence. But I wasn't silent anymore. I was listening, recording, and preparing. The snow outside had thickened, now painting the windows with slow, drifting ghosts. Somewhere in the living room, Nathan turned the volume up. Not loud, just enough to make her think he might forget she was in the room. But she never forgot. Not anymore. From across the room, her eyes caught the faint blinking red light on the backup drive tucked behind the toaster. Blink, blink, proof. Lyra turned back to the window and stared at her own reflection again. But this time, she looked deeper, beyond the fatigue, past the bruises you couldn't see, into the eyes of a woman who was no longer waiting to be saved. She was watching. She was documenting. And when the time came, she wouldn't scream. She would open the door calmly and leave him there, in the wreckage he built with his own hands. The hum of the refrigerator continued. The kettle clicked off, the snow fell harder, and the only sound louder than her silence was the rhythm of a plane beginning to breathe. The first file was named Classical Silence. Lyra typed it at 1:43 a.m., her bedroom lit only by the soft white glow of the laptop screen. She hadn't slept, not really, for weeks, but that night, as Nathan snored from the other room belly up like he owned the oxygen in the house, she pressed her fingers to the keyboard like it was an instrument. She knew how to compose. She'd taught others to do the same. This wouldn't be music, but it would be hers. The file wasn't dramatic. It was structured, clean, date, time, what he said, what he took, what bruises showed and what bruises didn't. She didn't embellish. She didn't comment. She recorded like a forensic pianist playing notes exactly as written. She saved it into a hidden cloud folder disguised as a music theory archive. Inside, subfolders named after composers. Chopin held images. Tchaikovsky stored screen recordings. Stravinsky was audio. Beethoven video. Mozart remained empty, for now. She logged out, shut the screen gently, and laid back down in silence. The bruising at her hip throbbed, but she welcomed the ache. It told her where she was, what time it was, that she was still awake and still in control of at least one thing, what she chose to remember. 2 days later, a knock at the back door rattled the silence. She peeked through the curtain and saw her Ellie brighten. Once the girl who sat in the back of Lyra's class with sleeves pulled to her knuckles, head down, heart even lower. Now 25, hair-cropped, short blazer, sharp. Ellie looked older, but her eyes still held that flicker of question beneath the surface. Lyra opened the door. "Hey," Ellie said, voice soft, unsure if she was intruding on something she couldn't see. "You said Thursdays were still good." Lyra nodded, stepped aside. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon and lemon cleaner. The kitchen was spotless, but the kind of spotless that felt intentional, defensive. Ellie set her coat down on the chair and hesitated. "I brought that file you asked about," she said, pulling a flash drive from her bag. "The encryption test," perfect, Lyra replied. But neither woman moved to plug it in. Instead, they stood there quiet, the weight of something unspoken hovering just above the table. Then Ellie saw it. The edge of a bruise, faint purple-blue, stretching from Lyra's collarbone and vanishing beneath the neckline of her shirt. Her breath caught. "Lyra." "It's fine," Lyra said quickly, reflexively. Ellie stepped forward, reached out but not to touch. "Just to be closer, is it?" Lyra didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was an answer all its own. And then Ellie did something Lyra hadn't expected. She stepped in and hugged her. No words, just arms around shoulders, one hand on the back of her neck, like she was anchoring her to the room, to the moment, to herself. It wasn't pity, it wasn't comfort, it was solidarity. When they pulled apart, Lyra's eyes were dry. "I need help," she said simply. Ellie didn't flinch. "Good," she said, "because I've been waiting for you to say that." They sat at the kitchen table. Ellie pulled out her laptop, opened a program Lyra didn't recognize, an interface full of code and windows and tiny pulsing icons. "This isn't FBI equipment," Ellie clarified. "I bought the gear myself. Keeps it clean." "Clean from what?" "From trace, from oversight, from questions that aren't asked to help you." Lyra swallowed. What do you have so far? Lyra opened the file vault, clicked through folders. She didn't explain. She just let Ellie look. And Ellie did, quietly, respectfully, line after line, image after image. After 10 minutes, she closed the laptop and looked up. Send all of this to me. Don't filter, don't second guess. I'll encrypt it and store backups in 3 separate places. I'll log metadata cross-reference timestamps. Just get it to me. Lyra opened her mouth to ask something, maybe if it was safe, maybe if it was legal, but Ellie held up a hand. You don't have to trust the system, you just have to trust me. That was the first time Lyra let herself believe she might not be entirely alone. For the next 3 weeks, the rhythm of her life shifted. By day, she was still Miss Jennings, gentle, calm, humming softly as she tuned student violins and corrected finger placement. But by night, she became someone else. Each evening after Nathan went to bed, usually after 2 beers and 10 insults, she logged in. Ellie taught her how to sweep for bugs, how to spot false wireless signals in the house, how to identify hidden microphones. They're cheap now, Ellie explained, holding one up the size of a pencil eraser. He could order a dozen for $20. Hide them in vents, in lamps. Lyra found 4, 2 in the kitchen, 1 in the vent above their bed, and 1 in her violin case. She didn't cry, she cataloged, she logged, she documented. Each discovery went into the vault. Ellie showed her how to use a Raspberry Pi microserver to back up everything automatically to an offline encrypted drive. She taught her to recognize data patterns when Nathan's phone pinged nearby Bluetooth devices when it went dark entirely. He's hiding something, Ellie said one night. Phones don't just vanish from grid like that unless they're shielded or swapped. Lyra nodded. He has another. We'll find it. They did. In a shoebox in the garage taped under a shelf, an older model phone scrubbed of history but still logged into a secret banking app. Ellie cloned it with a burner. They stayed ahead. And all the while, Lyra kept teaching. She wore scarves to hide bruises, claimed migraines to avoid faculty meetings, laughed at the right jokes, smiled at the right times. She remained invisible exactly where she needed to be. Only once did she break rhythm. A Tuesday afternoon, Nathan came home early and caught her humming Debussy in the kitchen. Something about the softness of her voice must have threatened him. He slammed a pan on the stove and hissed, "This house doesn't need background noise." That night, she added it to the file. 3:47 p.m., attempted vocal suppression, no contact, tone hostile. Her log entries began to read like music sheets, precise, predictive. She tracked his cycles. Sunday evenings, intoxicated, nostalgic, remorseful. Wednesday nights, agitated, restless, controlling. Fridays, paranoia, checks on her phone, her movements, the mail. Saturdays, silent, planning something. Ellie flagged the pattern. He's escalating, she said. I know. Then it's time we do too. By now, Lyra's home had become a labyrinth of controlled deception. Fake documents replaced real ones in drawers. Dummy emails rerouted spam. Her calendar looked like chaos, but it was coded. Each emoji meant something. She used Chopin for secure entries, list for Ellie-only access. Nothing was left to chance. She even began practicing questions in the mirror, lines she could use if she needed to lie to police or to Nathan. She didn't want to lie, but she wanted to live. Ellie upgraded her tools. A button cam disguised as a brooch, a ring with a hidden mic, a decoy phone with one emergency contact EB. The nights grew longer, colder. One night after Lyra sent over another batch of footage, Ellie messaged back. This isn't just for safety anymore. This is evidence. Lyra stared at the words. Evidence. It made everything feel sharper, closer. Real? Nathan began to sense something. He'd stop mid-sentence, squint at her like she was out of tune. You've changed, he said once. She smiled polite. People do. Don't try to be clever. She shook her head. I wouldn't. But she already had. She'd rewritten the sheet music of their home, changed the tempo, reassigned the keys. He was playing a melody he no longer understood. And still he hadn't heard the silence building beneath it. A silence filled with records, screenshots, GPS logs, audio, video, names, maps, memories. Proof. She kept everything. Because when the moment came and she could feel it coming, she wouldn't scream. She would play her part and let the evidence sing for her. The envelope was plain sealed with a single piece of tape and tucked behind a drawer that hadn't opened all the way in years. She'd only found it because she'd dropped a fork and had to reach down behind the stove. Her hand brushed the edge of paper thick folded. When she pulled it out, it was yellowed just enough to say it hadn't been placed there recently. She didn't open it right away. She sat at the kitchen table staring at the name on the front, her full name written in Nathan's sharp, squared handwriting. Lyra Jennings for safekeeping. There was nothing safe about the way her name looked in his letters. She peeled the tape, slowly unfolded the tri-folded pages, and scanned the contents. Her stomach turned. The document was a title transfer. Their house purchased together 2 years ago after their first miscarriage had been legally reassigned to Nathan Jennings, alone. Her signature was there, her name, the flourish she'd always used to dot the I in Jennings. Only she never signed it. Her hand shook not with fear but recognition. She had once shown Nathan how to replicate her signature, back when she believed in trust, when she believed in just-in-case powers of attorney and shared futures. Now he'd used it to erase her from the one place she thought she might still belong. The page beneath it was an addendum dated 6 months earlier. It stated she had relinquished all claims of ownership in exchange for wellness support during pregnancy recovery. Pregnancy. The word hit like ice water. She stood so quickly the chair behind her scraped hard across the tile. She grabbed the sink edge, tried to breathe, but the air came too tight. She hadn't spoken of the second loss, not even to Ellie, especially not to Ellie. And in that silence, Nathan had written his own version of the story where he gave and she took, where he sacrificed and she failed. Her eyes blurred, but she didn't cry. Instead, the memory came, not invited, not asked for, but whole. The hospital room. White, quiet, too quiet. She'd woken up after the second miscarriage to find him sitting at the window staring out into the snow. "I'm sorry," she'd whispered, voice raw. He hadn't turned. "Why?" "I lost it," she'd said. "I couldn't." Still, he hadn't looked back. Then he said it flat, factual, like reading from a medical report. "Maybe you just weren't meant to be a mother." She remembered the moment as if it were carved into her bones. Not because of the words, but because she believed him. She believed him enough to spend the next year apologizing for her own grief. Enough to think silence was strength. Enough to think love meant endurance. Now holding the forged signature in her hand, she knew better. This wasn't grief, this was strategy. And Nathan was the one playing the long game. That evening, her parents came over for dinner. They didn't come often, not because of distance, her mother lived 20 minutes away, but because Lyra stopped asking. The weight of pretending had become too heavy. But tonight they'd called. "We were in the neighborhood," her father said, which was never true. She made stew, lit candles, wore a turtleneck. They arrived precisely at 600. Her mother commented on the clean counters. Her father complimented the driveway. Nathan poured drinks, spoke softly, touched Lyra's shoulder just once for show. It was only halfway through dinner that the mask slipped. Her father asked, "You two ever think about trying again?" Lyra froze. Nathan didn't. He laughed. "We try all the time, just haven't made a keeper yet." The table went still. Her mother blinked twice. Her father looked into his glass like it might explain what had just happened. Lyra stood slow and steady. "Anyone want dessert?" Her mother followed her into the kitchen. When Lyra reached for the pie, her sleeve pulled back slightly. A bruise, just above the wrist. Subtle, yellowing, but unmistakable. Her mother's eyes locked on it, just for a second. She didn't ask. Instead, she smoothed her scarf and said, "You know, sometimes in marriage, you just have to pick your battles." Lyra didn't look at her, didn't say anything. She just sliced the pie and let the silence thicken until it tasted like smoke. After they left, she cleaned the house like it was a crime scene. Not because she was afraid, because she was done pretending it wasn't. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the lights dimmed low, the walls sweating with steam. Her reflection stared back like a ghost trying to remember who it used to be. "Min kong ton tai de vu along goi kok," she whispered. The words felt foreign on her tongue, like a language she hadn't spoken in years. But they fit. They held. Down the hallway, she heard Nathan locking the bedroom. He always locked it now. Said it was for privacy, for boundaries. But she knew better. She'd found the lockbox in the closet, watched him slide it under the bed when he thought she was in the shower. Watched the way he triple-checked the knob every time he left for work. He was hiding something. And whatever it wasn't just her. She waited until he was gone the next morning. He always left by 6:30. He always forgot to delete his search history. He always assumed she was too tired to notice. At 6:45, she took out the key she had made 2 months ago. A copy of a copy? She'd used putty, a piece of foil, and a candle to get the mold. Simple, silent, effective. She approached the bedroom like it was enemy territory. Slow, measured, no sudden moves. The key fit. The lock clicked. She didn't flinch. Inside, the air smelled stale. Dust, gun oil, something synthetic and cold. She opened the closet. The lockbox was still there. Inside, papers, photos, a second phone, 2 USB drives, a manila folder labeled with a single word, "control." Her hands hovered over it, then picked it up, then froze. A picture, not of her, of another woman, dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes tired. Another folder, another file. Camille Rivera, 2016, behavioral record, unstable, left without warning, claimed abuse, no proof. She flipped through the next few pages, emails, text, surveillance logs. Her blood ran cold. Nathan hadn't just been controlling her. He'd done this before. And this was a system. Not rage, not impulse. Strategy. A map of domination. And now she knew where she stood. She replaced the folder, locked the box, reset the room, and walked out with one goal: burn it all down without leaving a trace. When Nathan returned that night, he didn't ask what she'd done all day. He didn't smell the fear on her, because there wasn't any left. Only resolve. And beneath the resolve, something new. A beat. A rhythm. A pulse of clarity. She went back to her laptop, opened the folder titled Classical Silence, and created a new subfolder. Mozart. She smiled just barely. She'd finally found something to put there. The door to the basement had always been there, half hidden behind an old bookshelf, and a warped picture frame of a sunset Nathan claimed he'd taken in Iraq. Lyra had passed it every day, vacuumed near it, dusted it, even once used it as an excuse when a neighbor asked why they didn't have a proper guest room. That's just storage, she'd said then. It's where we keep the old Christmas stuff. But she'd never had a key. Until now. She stood before the door with her back straight, fingers steady, a single pin of sweat sliding down the inside of her elbow. The key she held was no thicker than a paperclip cut precisely by Ellie 2 days prior after Lyra had taken an imprint using a crayon and a strip of junk mail. She didn't breathe as she slipped the key into the lock. There was a tiny click, deceptively soft for something so monumental. The door creaked open an inch, then another, then wider. The stairwell beyond yawned downward like a throat-swallowing sound. She paused at the top step, listening. The house was quiet. Nathan had left 10 minutes ago, keys jangling, footsteps sharp, and a door slam that echoed finality. She'd watched him through the front blinds, noted the direction he turned, the time on the dashboard. 20 minutes minimum. 30 if he hit traffic. It was enough. Lyra descended the stairs. The air changed immediately. Cooler, denser, like the basement had been holding its breath since the last time someone stepped foot inside. Halfway down, she flicked the switch. No light. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a small pen light, and clicked it on. The beam sliced through the dark landing on concrete walls, metal shelving, and a large wooden cabinet bolted into the back wall. She exhaled slowly. This wasn't storage. It was something else entirely. She stepped down the last 2 stairs and into the room. The floors were swept clean, too clean. Every item had its place, labeled boxes, locked cases, a stack of notebooks secured with rubber bands. In the far corner stood a desk, metal, military grade. On top, a laptop powered off its screen, dark but fingerprint smeared. Next to it, an external hard drive, and next to that, a camera. Old, analog, heavy-bodied, the kind with night vision and wide-angle lens still attached. She picked it up, turned it over. No dust, recently used. Lyra's hands moved fast but precise. She opened the first drawer. Inside, photographs, dozens of them. Faces she didn't recognize. Women mostly, some looking directly at the lens, some unaware. She flipped one over. CR 2016 Dallas, unstable, monitored 3 months. Another. ST 2018 Denver, left early, no assets gained. She opened a file folder marked logistics. Typed pages, contracts, surveillance notes, financial statements, then an invoice. Her breath caught. Private intelligence services rendered, $12,400, client Nathan Jennings, purpose asset behavior tracking, cohabitation profiling. There was a line item, audio extraction from subject's personal laptop, date 3 months ago. Her laptop. She staggered back a step, nearly knocking over the pen light. She caught it midair, hand trembling now. The cold wasn't just physical anymore. It was threading up her spine, curling under her ribs. Nathan hadn't just been monitoring her. He had done this before. Professionally. Illegally. She moved to the cabinet. It was locked, but the latch was old. A quick twist of the screwdriver from the workbench nearby, and it snapped open. Inside, rows of items, flash drives, burner phones, SIM cards, and labeled sleeves. Some had names. Some had initials. Some had nothing at all. And in the back, 3 handguns, one still in its holster with a scratched-off serial number. Beside them, 2 boxes of ammunition and a small black box labeled Emergency Protocol. She didn't open that one. Not yet. Instead, she unclipped the FBI-issued microcamera from her bra strap, clicked the silent record button, and began the slow, methodical scan of the room. She narrated nothing. The camera saw everything. Ellie had told her, say nothing. Let the footage speak. If you talk, you tip your emotions. They'll use that in court. So she didn't speak. She moved like a ghost through the basement, capturing every item, every timestamp, every grotesque piece of Nathan Jennings' secret kingdom. She came to the notebooks. Leather-bound, numbered. She opened one. October 2017, subject Camille. Progress slower than projected, emotional reactivity high, paranoia triggering loyalty. Next page. Day 42, observed interaction with ex-partner. Response jealousy. Note. Consider leveraging trust through false confession. Lyra stopped reading. Closed the book. Swallowed bile. This wasn't surveillance. This was manipulation documented like research. She turned to the wall behind the desk. A corkboard was mounted there, mostly empty. But one photo was pinned dead center. It was her. Not from the wedding. Not from a school event. It was a photo of her standing in the garden, watering flowers, from behind. She stared at it for several seconds, long enough to feel her heartbeat change. Then, a sound. Soft. Muffled. But rising. Footsteps. Upstairs. Fast, close. Too soon. She glanced at her watch. He shouldn't have been back for at least 12 more minutes. Something had changed. She shut off the pen light, raced to the stairs, the creak of a door hinge overhead, his voice faint, muttering. On a call, no, he was talking to himself, like always. She pressed herself against the basement wall, ears straining. The footsteps moved toward the kitchen. If she waited, he'd open the pantry. The door. He'd see the bookshelf out of place, the frame crooked. The lock turned. She had seconds. Her feet moved fast up the stairs, breath held. She pulled the door closed behind her just as Nathan's shadow passed by the fridge. She ducked behind the bookshelf. He didn't see. She counted 5 slow breaths, then 6. His phone rang, loud, startled him. He answered. Yeah, he said, distracted. No, I came back, forgot the no, just 5 minutes. She slipped out from behind the shelf, stepped softly into the hallway down the opposite end. Bathroom. Safe, for now. She locked the door, pressed her back against the tile, and forced her lungs to work. She still had the camera, still had the footage, still had her heartbeat. But now she also had something else. Proof that what she feared wasn't delusion. It was designed, manufactured, documented. Nathan Jennings wasn't just a controlling husband. He was a collector of women, of data, of silence. But not hers. Not anymore. The first time Lyra learned the power of silence, she was 8 years old. It was a Saturday night. The television was on some comedy show with laugh tracks that didn't match the tone in the room. Her mother was folding laundry on the couch, her father pacing near the back door with a bottle of whiskey in hand, muttering about a neighbor's dog barking too loud. And Lyra, she was sitting on the carpet tracing the piano keys on a coloring book, her crayons lined up like soldiers. She didn't see the slap. She only heard it. The crack, the thud, the low guttural sound her mother made as she hit the floor. The world went quiet. Even the TV laugh track seemed to pause. She looked up. Her mother was still. Her father, red-faced, chest-heaving, turned left the room and slammed the garage door behind him. The whiskey bottle rolled across the linoleum. Lyra crawled toward her mother, fingers trembling. Mommy? Her mother flinched just barely, but didn't push her away. Footsteps, soft and slow. Her grandmother stood in the doorway, a dish towel in one hand, a rosary in the other. She looked down at the woman on the floor, then at Lyra. And in the most even voice imaginable, she said, "You want this house to stay whole, child." Lyra nodded, mouth too dry to speak. "Then you don't talk about what happens behind closed doors. You hear me." She did. She heard it like a sermon. She heard it like a curse. And decades later, she would still carry it in her chest like a second heartbeat. Now, as she stood in her kitchen with her cell phone pressed to her ear, Lyra felt the ghost of that silence rising again. Her mother's voice came through flat, as if shaped by decades of denial and polite deflection. "You sound tired," her mother said. "I am," Lyra replied. There was a pause. Then Lyra tried, just once. "I wanted to tell you something that happened." A deeper pause. "I'm listening," her mother offered. But it didn't sound like listening. It sounded like bracing. Lyra inhaled. "Nathan's been controlling. More than that, he forged the house deed. He's tracking me. Her mother cut her off. "Lyra, listen. I have proof," she said quickly, as if proof would matter. "Audio, video. I'm working with someone, a lawyer. Ellie's helping me." But her mother was already shaking her head on the other side of the line. "You don't need to involve outsiders. These things, they can be handled quietly. You're making it bigger than it is." "I'm not making it anything. I'm naming it." "You're exaggerating. He's a good provider. He always was respectful at dinners. You said yourself he made you feel safe." "I said that because I thought I had to." Her mother exhaled. "You need to be careful, Lyra. Not everything that hurts is abuse, and not every problem needs to be made into a public spectacle." Lyra's voice didn't shake. "I used to think that too," she said. "Then you were wiser then." Lyra let the silence sit there. Let it rot on the line between them. Let it bloom into something neither of them would ever bury. Then she ended the call. She didn't say goodbye. That night, she sat on the floor of her living room, Ellie beside her. The lights were dim, the world outside hushed by falling snow. Lyra's laptop was open, files displayed like a mosaic of years she had survived. "Did you send everything?" Ellie asked softly. Lyra nodded. "Even the recordings from the basement, the notebooks, the surveillance logs." Ellie opened her own laptop. She was quiet for a moment, fingers flying across the keys. "I have someone you need to meet." "A journalist." Ellie shook her head. "Not yet. A lawyer, female, former federal prosecutor. She only takes cases involving abuse, especially when there's evidence that crosses into national security data crime or identity theft." Lyra leaned forward. "Why would she take mine?" "Because you have something rare," Ellie said. "Proof, timeline, intent. And because you're not asking for a headline. You're asking for protection." Ellie clicked a few times, then held up her screen. A name, Alexis Bray. Her photo, dark blazer, steel gray eyes, the kind of face that didn't flinch. "She's discreet," Ellie added, "and she's very, very good." Lyra didn't hesitate. "Send it." By morning, she had a reply. "Subject received and reviewing. Will advise. Please ensure redundant backups. We'll call it 1300. Lyra closed her laptop and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in months, she felt like someone else was holding part of the weight. Later that day, she climbed into the attic and pulled out the smoke alarm Nathan had insisted on installing himself. It was fake. She knew that now. A disguised Wi-Fi camera. She disconnected it, rewired the shell, and plugged in a device Ellie had given her, a Bluetooth-triggered distress beacon. Not loud, but sharp. Enough to alert the local fire station and generate a home safety check in under 4 minutes. She tested it once. It worked. Then she programmed a delayed fire alarm into their home automation system. It would go off exactly 7 minutes after a specific trigger her remote signal. She called it Plan Ashes. Next, she rewired the door sensors. If Nathan tried to lock her in or lock himself in, the signal would override it. Every lock in the house would pop open in a 3-second burst. Ellie had called it fail-safe choir. Lyra just called it freedom. By midnight, the house was rigged not to explode, but to breathe, to speak, to shout if needed. Not just for her, but for every woman who had ever been told that silence was strength. That suffering was the price of love. That bruises fade and dignity can wait. As she adjusted the final sensor under the hallway console, Lyra felt the air around her shift. Not in fear, in readiness. The past had written its verses long enough. Now it was her turn to compose the final movement. And this one would not end quietly. The snow started falling just after 600 p.m., not the soft romantic kind. This was heavier, hushed, the kind of snow that blanketed sound and made every step feel like a secret. It coated the sidewalks, muffled the distant freeway, turned the house into an island of stillness. No footsteps, no cars, just white. Lyra stood in the hallway, staring through the frosted window panes. Her reflection was barely visible, blurred, shapeless, like a figure fading from one life into another. She was dressed in black, a wool coat buttoned to the throat, gloves, boots with rubber soles that didn't creak on wood. Her hair was pinned up tight under a knit cap. Her breath barely fogged the glass. Behind her on the console table, the small device Ellie had given her was blinking green. Trackers live, Lyra whispered to herself, not to mark time, but to mark resolve. In the living room, Nathan was lacing his boots. His duffel bag was already at the door. "I won't be late," he said, "just some drinks after the meeting." She nodded. "Drive safe." He kissed her cheek, lips, cold skin, already reeking of his cologne. She didn't flinch, just turned slightly so he wouldn't see her eyes. "I'll text when I'm on my way back," he said. "Okay." He left. The door shut behind him with a weight that felt ceremonial. She watched from the side window as he backed out of the driveway, paused to adjust the radio, then drove off into the slow swirl of snowfall. She waited. 3 full minutes, then moved. First the living room. She unplugged the wireless camera in the corner then the second hidden behind the bookshelf. She left the basement door unlocked. No creaking hinges this time. In the kitchen, she opened the drawer under the oven and pulled out a small black case. Inside, a pre-wired incendiary device with a 3-stage timer, non-lethal, designed to destroy physical contents, not people, flash burn only. A gift from a woman in Ellie's survivor circle who worked in demolition. Quiet, contained, thorough. Lyra carried it in one hand like a violin case. Down the basement steps, every shadow felt thicker. Every object seemed to stare back at her. She moved quickly past the shelves, past the desk, straight to the metal cabinet and bolted support beams. She placed the device at the center of the floor, precisely where Nathan had mounted the tripod in his old videos. She set the timer. 10 minutes, not 1 second more. Then she turned to the desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper folded in thirds, creased down the middle. A letter, handwritten in her cleanest cursive. She didn't leave it on the desk. She pinned it to the wall, beneath the photograph of herself he had once printed without her knowing. The note read, "I didn't run. I just chose not to live in the hell you built." She took one last look around. She didn't linger. No second guessing. No tears. Just footsteps measured final. She climbed the stairs, closed the basement door, reset the bookshelf, then picked up the remote Ellie had modified. A click, a pause, a blinking red light. The system was live. All sensors recording. She opened the front door. The cold rushed in like a gasp. She stepped outside and closed it behind her slowly, like tucking in a child. As she walked down the snow-covered sidewalk, she didn't turn around. But she felt it. The faintest pulse of heat. The light flashing behind glass. A warning. A countdown. She crossed the street, stood behind the large oak tree near the neighbor's lot, and looked back at the house she'd scrubbed 1,000 times. The windows glowed faint yellow. The roof was white with snow. 7 seconds passed. Then, a pulse. Like lightning without thunder. The basement exploded downward, not outward implosive engineering. The house didn't collapse, not completely, but a deep groan echoed from its core as smoke began to curl from the baseboards. The living room remained intact, but the floor had opened like a mouth. The hallowed place where he had kept his secrets, his trophies, his rituals now exposed to the night sky. Lyra stood perfectly still, not to admire, but to mark the moment. No one was hurt, No neighbors stirred, no sirens yet. But the house was speaking, finally. Its walls no longer shielding the horror. Its foundation now visible, scarred, monstrous, undeniable. She didn't record the explosion, Ellie had insisted. Let someone else find it. You don't own the evidence, you just expose it. Lyra turned and walked back toward the alley where her car was parked under a streetlight. Inside the glove box, a burner phone buzzed once. Camera A, feed intact, audio live, lawyer notified. She let the message sit there unacknowledged. Instead, she slid behind the wheel, turned the ignition, and sat there with her hands on the steering wheel. Breathing. Not shaking. Not smiling. Just still. In the rearview mirror, smoke swirled into the snow-heavy air like a soul finally allowed to rise. She whispered only once to herself into the night, "Let the truth burn cleaner than the lie ever lived." Then she drove away. The yellow tape went up faster than the flames had died. By the time Lyra returned this time, not as a wife, not as a victim, but as a witness, the cul-de-sac was cordoned off. 3 black SUVs lined the curb. A forensic van was backed into the driveway. The front door to the Jennings home hung crooked on its hinges, and a half-dozen agents in jackets bearing the bold letters FBI moved like quiet sharks through the snow. She stepped out of the car beside her attorney. Alexis Bray, dark wool coat hair pulled into a tight knot, heels that clicked like truth across pavement. "Stay calm," Alexis said without looking at her. "You've already won the first round." A nearby agent looked up and nodded at Alexis. "They're inside," he's still shouting. Lyra followed. Through the yard, up the steps, into the war zone. The basement had collapsed almost surgically, exactly as planned. The wooden beams above it were scorched, but intact. A crater of charred metal and twisted support studs gaped where the floor once was, exposing the vault of horrors Nathan had once curated in secret. But it wasn't a secret anymore. Inside the foyer, 2 agents held Nathan Jennings by the arms. His face was red-streaked with soot and rage. He wore a wrinkled gray shirt, half-buttoned, as if he'd been dragged out mid-denial. "I want my phone," he was shouting. "Where is it? She planted this. She's insane." He saw Lyra. The room paused. Everything paused. Even the dust seemed to hover midair. "You," he spat. "You did this." She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She stepped forward calmly. Her voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than anything else in the room. "I didn't destroy you, Nathan," she said. "I just let the law see what you built in the dark." He lunged or tried to. The agents pulled him back instantly, hands gripping tighter. "You think this ends me," he barked. "You think people won't see through you." "They'll see," she replied, "now that there's nothing left to hide behind." The agent to Nathan's left nodded once at Alexis. "We'll transfer him for processing now." They walked him out in cuffs. Still screaming, still small, still trying to drown in his own noise. Lyra didn't watch him leave. She turned toward the lead investigator and handed him a sealed envelope and a black USB drive. "This has everything," she said. "Video, audio, metadata, records, his aliases, access points, dates. I've also included the forged title deed, the camera serial numbers, and the financial trail. It's all in the folder." The agent took it, surprised at the detail. "You cataloged all this yourself?" "No," she replied. "He did. I just kept score." A camera flash popped outside. Reporters had arrived. A female journalist called through the doorway. "Miss Jennings, is it true there was a bunker under your home?" Another, "Did you know your husband was spying on multiple women?" A third, "Are you pressing criminal charges?" Alexis stepped in front, shielding her with one arm. No comment. But Lyra did speak just once. Loud enough for them to hear. "Yes, there was a bunker, and no, I'm not pressing charges." Pause. Flashbulbs. Silence. "I'm presenting the evidence. Let justice do what I couldn't." By the time they reached the precinct, the headline was already online. Colorado woman exposes ex-military husband's secret surveillance cell beneath suburban home. Another followed 5 minutes later. "I didn't run, I just stopped hiding." The story behind the woman who brought down her abuser with strategy, not sobs. Inside the station, Lyra sat across from an intake officer while Alexis reviewed the chain of custody with the lead detective. The officer across from her, young, tired eyes, coffee breath, asked, "Did you ever feel physically unsafe?" Lyra stared at him a moment too long, then said, "You know what's funny? You all ask that like it's a moment, like it happens on a Tuesday." He blinked. "Sorry, I felt unsafe every time I answered a question too slow. Every time I wore the wrong shirt. Every time I set the fork on the left side of the plate instead of the right. Does that count?" He looked down. "Yes, ma'am." She slid a second folder across the table. "Here's every name I found in his files. Other women, some I know, most I don't. But they'll recognize his voice. Some of them probably don't even realize they were being watched." He nodded, mouth tight. "We'll open a separate task force." Outside the precinct, reporters swarmed the front lot. Inside, a statement was being drafted by the regional FBI field office. "What Ms. Jennings uncovered appears to extend beyond domestic abuse into federal crime. We will be pursuing this investigation across state lines with full prosecutorial support." Alexis sat beside Lyra on the cold metal bench as they waited for fingerprinting and exit processing. "He's going to push back," Alexis said. He's going to call you a liar, a hysteric, a thief, a traitor. You're going to see headlines that say you're unstable, that you tricked him, that you never even loved him. Lyra looked straight ahead. He already said those things. He just used to say them in a whisper. A nearby screen flickered with news coverage. A still shot of the crater in their house. Overlaid text, former Marine caught in domestic surveillance scandal. Alexis leaned in. This is only the beginning. You sure you're ready? No, Lyra replied. Then added, but I'm done being unready just so he can stay comfortable. She stood. And this time her legs didn't shake. The meeting took place in a borrowed church basement. Not the kind with pews or stained glass. This was the multi-use kind. Half-painted walls, folding chairs, a corkboard with faded flyers about flu shots and potlucks. The floor still smelled faintly of wax and pine sol. The air was cool, almost reverent. Lyra walked in first. She hadn't known what to expect what survivors looked like in person beyond headlines and names in court filings. But the three women who waited for her at the plastic folding table weren't victims. They were architects of stories of memory of survival. Dana sat on the left. Black leather boots, a scar along her jaw that looked earned. She had once served in logistics under Nathan's command. She was also the one who had filed the earliest complaint in his military record, redacted, buried, but never forgotten. Alana was beside her. Slight, quiet hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She had met Nathan at a government tech expo 5 years ago. Their relationship lasted 3 months. He called her unstable when she tried to leave, called her ungrateful when she filed a police report. The charges disappeared. She didn't. The third woman, Cass, was still technically in hiding. A burner phone on the table in her place, a voice on speaker, a story identical in shape to theirs. I'm here, she said through the small speaker, because none of us should have to be in the dark to be believed. Lyra didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. She just listened. And as she did, something shifted in her. Not power, not pride. Recognition. She wasn't a lone case anymore. She was part of a pattern. Dana tapped the table. Here's what I think. We start with policy. Surveillance laws in domestic households are ancient. Most states don't even recognize it unless there's a weapon involved. Alana nodded. We get a bill named. We lobby survivors as expert witnesses. We build a timeline, propose safeguards. Cass's voice echoed through, and we give women the vocabulary. Because that's what no one gives us, not a gun, not a shelter. Words. To name what's happening when it's still invisible. Lyra leaned forward, and we name him. Dana didn't flinch. We name him, and everyone like him. That night, the 4 women stayed until well past midnight. Mapping, outlining, drafting language. Their pain turned to legislation, their survival into strategy. They didn't hug goodbye. They nodded like generals after war plans. A week later, Ellie called Lyra from a quiet cafe in downtown Boulder. I've been thinking, Ellie said, we have platforms for trauma, for shelters, for emergency resources, but not for teachers. Lyra tilted her head. Teachers? You're not the only one, Lyra. There are hundreds of teachers working through abuse in silence, too scared to speak out because of tenure, reputation, perception. No one's talking about abuse behind closed classrooms. And I want to build something, Ellie continued. A secure network, resources, legal contacts, data encryption training, a place where no woman, no educator has to feel stupid for being controlled. Lyra's chest tightened. Call it what you want, Ellie added, but it'll be yours, built from your story. Lyra didn't respond right away, because something else was blooming behind her eyes. Not strategy, not vengeance, but music. It had started in her sleep, a melody, just 6 notes repeating unfinished. It returned during silence, while washing dishes, while folding laundry, while walking past the ruins of the house. She sat down that night and wrote the full piece. She called it The Quiet That Wasn't Mine. She printed it on staff paper and sent it to the community center downtown, the same one where she'd taught her very first music class when she was 23, fresh out of college, still believing all good men were just complicated. The director called her the next morning. We have a recital in 3 weeks, a youth showcase. We can slot your piece in at the end. Just one condition, Lyra said. It has to be played by a girl, one who hasn't performed solo before. He agreed. The night of the recital, the room was packed. Parents with cameras, folding chairs in neat rows, paper programs passed from hand to hand. Ellie sat beside Lyra. Alana and Dana arrived late and stood in the back. The girl chosen for the final piece was 12. Pale braces, hair, and a nervous braid. Her name was Natalie. She sat down at the piano and stared at the keys like they were foreign. The first few notes trembled, then settled, and then breathed. And when she reached the bridge, those 6 notes that Lyra had first heard in her dreams, the room held its breath. Not from awe, from knowing. Every sound after that came like a release, like something that had been held too long in the lungs. When Natalie finished, no one clapped right away. The silence was full. Then a single pair of hands started. Then another. Then the room erupted. But Lyra didn't clap. She just closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, she let herself cry, not from fear, not from grief, from witness. Because that night her music spoke in a room full of strangers, and none of them turned away. The courtroom was colder than she expected, not in temperature but in spirit. Federal courtrooms don't allow for drama. No wood-paneled theatrics, no gasps, no thundering gavels, just gray carpet metal benches, fluorescent lights, and the slow ticking of law at work. Lyra sat in the second row. Front row was for counsel. To her left was Alexis Bray reviewing notes for the closing. To her right, an empty chair. Ellie had wanted to be there, but the court had denied observers beyond the parties listed. Too much press, too much noise. Behind her, 5 women, each one with a different version of her story. Dana, Alana, a new name Rose who'd come forward just 2 weeks ago. Cass by video monitor, and a teacher from Vermont who Lyra had never met until that morning. The clerk called the court to order. The judge entered. Nathan was escorted in wearing the dull beige of federal custody. His hair had grayed at the temples. His posture was defiant, but his eyes darted quick, unsettled, searching for someone who might still believe him. No one stood. No one even blinked. The prosecutor went first. She laid out the evidence like a surgeon. Clean, precise, video footage, time-stamped documents, metadata trails, banking records with aliases, the forged deed, the internal military reports, the emails threats disguised as discipline, the financial siphoning, the private server, the voice recordings where Nathan said things like, "It's not abuse if she agrees to live here." Every piece was a nail. By the end of it, the coffin was airtight. When the defense stood, their argument was short. He had PTSD, he had stress, he loved her. He didn't understand the technology. He thought it was for safety. He never touched her. Lyra didn't react. Because the truth had already spoken louder. Then came the part she'd rehearsed for weeks. Victim impact. She was invited to speak. The court officer asked if she wanted a podium. She declined. She walked forward. No notes, no script, just her voice. And for the first time since the house burned, the courtroom felt still in a holy way. She didn't cry. Not once. "I'm not here to make you feel sorry for me," she began. "I'm not here to tell you that I lost myself because I didn't. I buried myself, and I dug myself out." Nathan shifted. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the judge. "I'm a music teacher. That's how I understand the world, through rhythm, through silence. And I spent years learning to live in a house where silence was the loudest thing." Pause. "I'm not asking for vengeance. I'm not asking for punishment. I'm asking this court to do what I couldn't do, alone create distance. Legal, moral, physical distance between me and the man who used love as a leash." Another pause. "I am not broken, but I am changed, and he doesn't get to shape that change anymore." When she stepped back, no one applauded. But one of the jurors, an older woman, wiped her eyes. Nathan refused to speak during his turn. His attorney said he declined a statement. He sat with arms crossed, jaw locked. The judge reviewed the sentence in monotone. 12 years in federal prison, no parole eligibility for 8, permanent restraining order, lifetime digital restriction, no access to surveillance technology, personal data collection systems, or remote security devices. Registered offender under the federal digital coercion statute. Nathan didn't react, but his shoulders dropped half an inch. That was enough. Lyra stood as he was escorted out. He glanced back. She met his eyes, but not with hate, with vacancy, like looking through glass that no longer reflected him. He was no longer her story, just a footnote in it. As she walked out of the courtroom, the press didn't shout her name. There were no flashbulbs, no questions, no drama, just sky, just her, just the sound of a closing door behind her that she would never walk through again. The new apartment was small, but the silence inside it was finally hers. One bedroom, one window that overlooked the park where students played their violins during spring. Hardwood floors that creaked like old stories, a heater that sputtered but worked. The kitchen had exactly 3 drawers and no dishwasher, but the sunlight hit the counter just right in the mornings. Lyra carried her life into the space in 3 trips. Books, sheet music, 3 bowls, 2 plates. One framed photograph of her standing outside the community center laughing, taken by Ellie when she wasn't looking. She hung it near the front door. The first thing she did was set up the desk. It wasn't for bills. It wasn't for strategy. It was for something that had been waiting too long, truth in her own hand. That same evening, Ellie showed up with something wrapped in a velvet cloth and a crooked smile on her face. "I saw it and thought of you," she said, placing it gently on the table. Lyra unwrapped it. A guitar, acoustic, mahogany body, light as breath. On the back, etched in careful lettering, were 5 words. "You didn't run, you stood." She traced the inscription with her fingers, then looked up, throat too tight to speak. Ellie just nodded. "Now play something for no one but you." That night she did. Not for the stage, not for survival, just to remember what her hands felt like when they weren't bracing for impact. Days passed in rhythm. She taught classes at the academy down the street. She took the long route home, past the bakery, past the small secondhand bookshop, past the bench where she once watched winter arrive without feeling it. She began writing again, not music. Letters. The first one was to her mother. She didn't know if she would send it, but she wrote it in longhand. Dear Mom, you once told me that silence keeps a house from falling apart. I understand now you meant well. You wanted the pieces to stay together even if they were sharp. But I lived in a house where silence didn't keep the roof steady. It cracked the foundation. You didn't know. Or maybe you did and didn't want to see it. I'm not writing this to blame you. I'm writing it because the silence between us can't hold anything anymore. Here's what happened. She didn't dress it up. She didn't soften the edges. She told the story plainly, not to convince, but to claim. She ended with, I'm okay. I'm building something new. I hope someday you'll visit. Not to explain, just to sit. Love, Lyra. She folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and placed it in a drawer. Not to hide it, but to let it wait. Healing, she was learning, wasn't always a thunderclap. Sometimes it was letting something sit without needing to resolve it. 1 month later, she started writing again. This time not a letter. A book. She titled the Word document, Silence Doesn't Keep Anyone Safe. The first sentence came easy. I was never the girl who screamed, but silence almost killed me. Each chapter was short like a song. Each section a note held too long. She wrote in the mornings before school and at night after the dishes. Sometimes between classes when her students practiced scales. She didn't write to be published. Not yet. She wrote to understand what had happened when no one was watching. Chapter 5 was called The Weight of Watching Your Own Life Like a Movie. Chapter 9, How to Recognize Abuse That Never Raises Its Voice. Chapter 11, You Can Love a Man and Still Need Him in Prison. Each sentence landed like a piano key, clean, deliberate, true. On weekends, she read aloud the parts she wasn't sure about. Ellie would sit cross-legged on the floor, nodding slowly. That one hits, she'd say, or that's too careful, say it like you mean it. So Lyra rewrote and reread and rewrote again. She wasn't chasing perfection. She was exhaling what she'd been forced to hold. Midway through chapter 12, she typed a line she hadn't planned. I used to think survival was about escaping, but sometimes it's about staying long enough to bring the fire to the surface. She stared at the sentence for a long time, then hit save. Outside her window, spring had arrived. The students were back in the park, laughter echoing. One girl dragged a cello case behind her, too big for her body, too determined to ask for help. Lyra smiled. She reached for her guitar and strummed once, soft and clean. For the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't scare her. It held her. The hallway was longer than she remembered. Or maybe it was quieter now and she could finally hear how it breathed. Lyra paused at the threshold of the classroom. The familiar creak in the tile beneath her heel. The smell of pencil shavings and varnish. Soft laughter echoing from another room down the corridor. This was her room. Her name still on the door. Ms. Jennings, music periods 235. She stepped inside. It was the same as it had been, the piano in the corner, the bulletin board half pinned with faded concert posters and staff reminders, the crooked stool she always meant to replace. And yet everything felt different, because now the silence wasn't oppressive. It was ready. It was waiting. She unpacked her satchel and placed a single folder on the desk. No laptop today, no plan, just a stack of blank composition paper and a small bouquet of irises left by the janitor with a note, glad you're back. The kids missed you. She turned toward the window. The light filtered through the blinds, warm and gold, washing across the chairs in slow stripes. A late spring breeze stirred the sheet music she'd pinned to the board, Mozart, Debussy. And at the center, The Quiet That Wasn't Mine by Lyra Jennings. The first bell rang. And then came the feet, dozens of them, running, skipping, shuffling with sleepy sneakers and buzzing whispers. The students poured in, some waving, some too shy to speak, but all with wide eyes. Not because she was different, but because they were glad she was here. She greeted each by name. Good morning, Milo. Hey there, Juniper. You brought your clarinet, Theo. You're ahead of me already. They sat unusually quiet for a Monday. A boy in the back raised his hand and asked, are we going to talk about, what happened? Lyra didn't flinch. She smiled just slightly. No, she said. We're going to talk about what comes after. She walked to the board and wrote one sentence. Music begins where the words run out, then turned around. We're going to learn how to say the things we've never had the words for, and we're going to do it one note at a time. They nodded. And just like that, the room began again. They practiced scales, slowly, awkwardly, some off-key, some hesitant, but every measure was honest, every mistake allowed. And Lyra let herself laugh, really laugh. A sound that didn't ask permission, that wasn't measured. When class ended, one of the girls lingered. She couldn't have been more than 10. She held out a folded piece of paper. Lyra opened it, a stick figure drawing her at the piano surrounded by hearts. Above it, scrawled in purple marker, "Thank you for coming back." Lyra crouched and met her eyes. I didn't come back, she said softly. I came through. That afternoon, the school emptied out. The sun dipped low. Custodians locked doors. The last buses rumbled away. Lyra stayed behind. She cleaned the board, stacked the chairs, straightened the posters. Then she walked to the window. It was quiet now, not hollow but full. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small candle she had carried for weeks. Pale ivory wax, unscented, a single unused wick. She placed it on the sill, struck a match. The flame flickered, then steadied. Outside, the world moved on cars passing birds overhead, a child on a scooter chasing the last light of the day. Inside, Lyra stood alone, warm in the soft halo of dusk and flame. She turned her gaze out the window, then turned to face the empty room, and finally to the audience that had walked this far with her through fear, through fire, through silence. Her voice was quiet but unshakable. I didn't run. Pause. I just stepped out. Another beat, calm, true. And he's still trapped inside the hell he made for himself. She let the words linger, not like punctuation, but like a final note held then gently released into the quiet. And when she walked out, she left the candle burning, a small flame, for anyone who might come behind her, looking for light.